Good, well done. So everybody thinking of all the marvelous things of the world, we kind of pile them all up and offer them to the Buddha as a request for the teaching. That's the meaning, you know.
Sashi perki yuksheng meto Trahamri rabinji Nihidegen padi Sange shindu meche huwagi Dokunam dashingla Chapachu Jetsun lama dampakyenam Keche kikala Kense chesintri Jita sampe duje simala Sakye chuki chapa Daktu so Vidam Gururat Namadalakami Atsayami.
Right. So now, as always, thinking in our mind as we say these words, first of all, we're reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And second, we are making this marvelous aspiration, so far-reaching, you know. We're going to listen to these teachings so we can take tools, so we can develop our amazing potential, so we can be a benefit to others. That's the one. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shok sangye chadang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. You know, I think what's nice to let's just talk about in a casual kind of way this whole idea of how it's, you know, how, because it's such a different view for us. How is it that our mind is not physical, you know? I mean, it's such a radical, especially because we're so educated in the philosophical materialist view, you know? I mean, especially if we're you know, philosophical materialism is our view of the universe, and we sort of tend to look fairly cynically sometimes at views that are so-called religious, don't we? We just think it's all made up by people and it's all based on fear, and somehow this is a very common view among some people who just have the scientific view, you know. So of course the concept there is you can't prove it. You can't prove it, and if you can't prove it, then that's, you know, the material is used, and it doesn't exist. So this is what's interesting, isn't it? If we look at the Buddhist view, Buddha, like the Christians and the Muslims, does posit in more than the physical. That's clear. But the big difference is Buddha doesn't refer to a thing called a soul. And of course, there's no concept of a creator. That's the radical difference. So from one perspective, like we're talking, it is the scientific view. The scientific view insofar as you take something as your hypothesis, you work it through, you think it through intellectually, you make sure it's coherent first intellectually, and then eventually you need to prove it to be true. So you learn the theory that 1 + 1 is 2, and then you go and prove it to be true. I think that surely is the method that we find very encouraging. Well, that happens to be, as you know, often enough from how we talk about it, that's Buddha's approach. So the implication, of course, here is that, yes, Buddha does assert something that does exist that is not physical, but he's saying you can prove it. That's the big difference. I mean, I think if the Christian teaching, it's very reasonable. You know, I was at a teaching of Jado Rinpoche, this Lama who's in my Tripa College all week in Portland, one of Lama Zopa's gurus, one of the highest Gelugpa Lamas around these days. I don't know if anybody's seen this. I want to tell you again that every day already he's done 2 teachings, and tonight he's giving a 3rd, but we're here together instead. But Jado Rinpoche is in Portland, and every week, and on the 23rd, on Sunday, he's giving a Tara initiation. And he's one of Lama Zopa's gurus, you know, and that for me gives confidence, but also he's one of the highest Gelugpa Lamas around these days, and there aren't many, you know, they're all passed away. So he's, I really recommend you look at my Tripa in Portland. Tripa College in Portland. He's teaching every day, and he's giving refuge for those who haven't taken it before online. He's giving the 8 Mahayana precepts for those who want, and he's giving teachings every night. And on the 23rd, he's giving Tara Empowerment. Just letting you know this. So anyway, in his teaching last night, he was talking exactly about this, the mind, especially the Vajrayana model of the mind and the physical universe, you know. So that was such a long point. I forgot my first point. He said something last night I was talking about. Oh yes, of course, this is the point. This is exactly the point. We make this often, that, you know, if you're a Christian, if you do posit a creator, a superior being who is the superior to everybody else, and that is definitely the view of a creator, then by definition, you can't prove it. By definition, you cannot prove that God is right. Because if you prove that God is right, that means you're God. And that is the worst thing possible. You cannot posit that possibility if you're a Muslim or a Christian, because God is always superior and God made us. So, but, you know, it's not possible. It will be schizophrenic to assert that God makes you and then you become God. This is too weird. It just doesn't seem to fit, you know. But Buddha's view is not that. And also what's interesting, what Jada Rinpoche said, no, it's another point. Well, never mind that. So the Buddhist view is the scientific view that basically Buddha's saying, if you can't prove it, finally, then it doesn't exist. He totally agrees with that. He totally agrees with that. So it's very sobering to hear that that is the approach. It just means if there is something that's not physical, it's fairly evident. We have to then posit, this is what we have to do. We have to posit the possibility that you can access that subtler level of mind. And that subtler level of mind, this is the Buddha's view, because it's more subtle in its capacity for cognition, then obviously it cognizes things that are more subtle, such as the past, such as the future, such as the minds of others, such as long distances. In other words, this is the Buddha's entire point. And this is also why the point, we can't rush in and just believe what Buddha says. That's just plain foolish. You can't just rush in and believe what Einstein says. You've got to start at the beginning with 1 + 1 is 2 and go through all the stages. So same here. So in other words, we need to get it clear first, theoretically. And I stress this point a lot. It seems to me, if something is true, especially a body of knowledge, you know, I say this a lot. I think it's really important to think about it. A body of knowledge, whether it's called math, acupuncture, Buddhism, and indeed it is a body of knowledge. And from the Buddhist point of view, it's a theory of everything. I think in science they're looking for that, isn't it? A theory, there's another term, a theory of everything, a totally coherent view of the universe. That's exactly what the Buddhist view is. And of course, he's not asking you to believe him, but that's absolutely valid to say that, to say it. The Buddhist view of the universe is a coherent view of everything. And it's coherent. So you have to decide that. You have to look into it and see. You know, don't just believe or disbelieve for that matter. So the thing is, in the Buddhist view, you know, what I'm saying, not Buddhist view, but this is what I'm saying. This is logical, it seems to me. If it's not, please point it out. That if some body of knowledge is valid, it's the crucial point. Then it has to be first coherent theoretically. This is seems really logical. And it's like, you know, you want to play like Bach. You need first to get your head around the theories of the music. And you could learn to read music so well, and you could have a good ear for it. You could even sing the notes as you see them and see all the notes, all the theories before you even play the piano. You could easily do that. Acupuncture, I think if you understood acupuncture theoretically, you could pass your exams perfectly in acupuncture. And because you've got the whole picture, all the pieces of the puzzle fall together. It would be coherent. It would be coherent theoretically. This is exactly the Buddhist approach. So just even hearing this, it should be rather confidence-making for us. You know, at least someone's positing that, you know, that you can first, you know, it has to be first theoretically coherent. So that's why we have to study. We have to study it. I mean, if we just think Buddhism is closing your eyes and being mindful and watching your breath, you know, and I mean, it's just like, it's completely absurd. It's like embarrassingly ridiculous. It's just plain idiotic. This is why they study 20, 30 years in the Tibetan monastic university system, coming straight from the Nalanda tradition. Back in the 5th, 6th, 7th century in India, before everything collapsed there, it was carried in the minds of all the holy beings straight over to Tibet, where it was carried on and is still existing in the minds of these holy beings. So this view that there's something called consciousness that isn't a function of the physical has been around for several thousand years. As His Holiness says, I always keep quoting. It was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation to the nature of self. And this is the totally unique point about the Buddhist view, that, you know, if you study psychology in the West, you need to, yes, these days it's wonderful. You should go, at least they demand, if before you go off and be a psychotherapist, but at least do some internal work yourself, you know. At least, you know, try to have a bit of self-awareness, put it into practice before you start trying to help other people. That's great. But when it comes to philosophy, I don't think there's any view, really any view in the modern world, in the modern views of philosophy, that says you must practice it first. I mean, I remember Professor Jeffrey Hopkins, when I was working with him on his book, Meditation on Emptiness, because we commissioned him to, we said we agreed to publish this book of his back in 1983. He'd done it earlier, and it was only his thesis, and it was only available as a microfiche, you know, that old-fashioned way they used to have things. So we published it back in 1983 when I was working with him editing it. He told me that he was the one who was he was appointed the head of the Asian Studies Department, or whatever they called it, back in 1976 in the University of Virginia, I think it's called that. And I mean, this Buddhism study has been around in many American universities, and there's so many now. It's probably one of the best places for studying Tibetan Buddhism in the universities in America. But he was the first one, he said, who was a practitioner, a serious practitioner, who spoke Tibetan, who had gurus, who'd taken empowerments, who put his money where his mouth was. And he said, among his fellow philosophers, he was considered inferior because he dared to practice it. Because in the Buddha, and you see, I think in the materialist view, we have no view of the mind that's subjective. That's inferior. It's got to be objective. So the Buddhist idea is utterly so radically different that you need first to begin to really master what's going on in the mind and develop realizations such as clairvoyance, and then realize emptiness and get bodhicitta and all the rest. You need to have mastered this mind. You need to have accomplished single-pointed concentration. You need to have accomplished this extraordinary, subtle, sophisticated level of concentration and access this subtler level of your mind that Buddhism and the yogis before are positing as existing. And right there, you prove already so much. You prove clairvoyance, and you can prove, therefore, reincarnation right at that point, because clairvoyance enables you, as you progress, to act, because you've accessed this subtler level of mind. You can see the past, you can see the future, you can see your own mind, you can see the minds of others. All this is posited in the Buddhist body of knowledge. It's not just said you're supposed to have faith in it and cross your fingers. It's all there in the theories. That should be very kind of encouraging for us to know that's all there in the theories, highly articulate, well presented, you know, the power the mind has. So even just that alone, theoretically, should be encouraging for us. It's not just, you know, Buddha saying, well, it's true, you better believe me. It's just kind of true, you have to believe it. No, all the teachings are there, all the philosophical views are there, all the explanations are there in detail, coming from where? The experiences of the previous yogis, you know. Like any body of knowledge, it passed on from person to person. So this should encourage us. But of course, the starting point has to be that we've got to open our minds to the possibility. So when we as materialists first hear Buddhism, like I know how it was in the late 60s and early 70s, when people started going, let's say, to Kopan Monastery, set up by Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe in 1971. You know, it was one of the first, when all the hippies started going to the East, looking for drugs and enlightenment. For some reason, we assumed they went together. So it was always shocking, absolutely shocking to hear from, you know, Lama Zopa when he started teaching the Lam Rim, just the first point he had to teach, and I mentioned this in the mind module, because we're so used to thinking and believing the mind is the brain, and looking down on our nose at anybody who dares to posit something that isn't physical. It's very shocking to hear. This is Buddha's view, and so Lama Zopa would teach the view of the beginninglessness of mind. This is several things packed into that. Just look at this again. I have to answer my door. Hang on, I'm so sorry. I forgot to put the no disturb sign on my hotel door. Okay. So the beginninglessness idea also gets us looking into the concept of no creator, gets us looking into the concept, the fundamental concept of cause and effect. And this, of course, is a major part of the whole business of looking into death and rebirth, you know. And then once we've done that, let's then look at how it's possible, even just the theories, a little bit of how it's possible for a human being to die and find their consciousness running off to a lion's mummy and waking up as a lion, you know. I mean, it just sounds like, that's always like a joke for us in the West. Oh, you be born as a mosquito, can you? We say it hilariously, like it's like the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard in our lives. Well, of course you can, says Buddha. So let's look at all that, and let's look a bit more again at the realms of existence that Buddha is asserting, you know, because it's totally to do with rebirth, isn't it? So, okay. So this concept of beginninglessness is very logical, I think. Well, it is, I think. You know, if we're taking the view of cause and effect. As far as Buddha is concerned, one of the natural law that runs the universe, I mean, it runs the universe, or I like to say it, within which the universe runs, is the law of cause and effect. Everything we know, everything that exists, we know it's the product of previous things. It's a process, you know. You put this and this and this together and you get that. You know, if you break up that, it'll break into its component parts. I think everything, I mean, I don't know anything about abstracts. I don't know enough about math and all those things. I don't know about all that stuff. I don't know about that. But there's certainly concepts like this in Buddhism. And okay, I've got to talk about it here. All right. There are two ways that things exist at this conventional level. And there are two types of phenomena. When you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn this worldview. And the first word you learn, is the word existent. And then you learn various synonyms for that which exists. So this is already a good start. The universe consists of things that exist, okay? And already this is kind of interesting. We think, well, okay, thanks, Buddha. That sounds pretty intelligent. Why are you telling us that? Well, you know, because he's telling us, I'm sorry, folks, but because you've got some delusions in your mind, you're living in la-la land and you're positing things that literally don't exist. So there's this massive thing in Buddhism, learning to establish what exists and what doesn't, both conventionally and finally, ultimately. This is the deal in Buddhism, because its fundamental point is that we all suffer because we are not in touch with that which exists, which is the point that when you finally become a Buddha, rid your mind of all the delusions, perfected all the goodness, you literally are in sync with that which exists. There's no longer any kind of left over. That's why the word omniscient is a characteristic of a Buddha. And Buddha happens to say that every one of us can accomplish this because that's the natural state of our mind when it's finally unencumbered by all delusions. So, okay, so existent, there are several synonyms: phenomenon, object, object of knowledge, established base. There are several synonyms. Okay. Now, the next division, this is how kind of map of the universe. This next division is phenomena are divided into two. There are those, this is a typical Tibetan words, Buddhist words, and I'll explain. There are those that are permanent and there are those that are impermanent. Now, when we hear permanent, we hear lasting forever, and that's not the meaning here. There are two ways that impermanent things function. One is that they are indeed the product of causes, and two, they change from moment to moment. So the whole meaning of permanent in Buddhism, Alex Berzin, this American scholar, who's a really excellent scholar, he's got a great website, but he's got his own very unique translation terms. But this is I think I like this one. His term for this is abstract, is the word abstract phenomena. And that's probably, we get that, I think. So I'll give examples. So this is a really major point to understand, this division of all phenomena in the universe into those that are impermanent, that change from moment to moment, that are the products of causes. And then there are some, there are abstract phenomena that they say are not the product of causes, do not change from moment to moment. And it is abstract. And often, I mean, when I'm talking in my teachings, normally I don't discuss this because it just gets confusing for us. So this is where understanding emptiness this is necessary for understanding emptiness. When we talk about emptiness, we talk about it as the absence of something. Emptiness is the absence of something. So we talk about this a lot. You know, if I use the example of there's no tea in my cup. So one way of saying it is when I look in the cup and there's no tea in it, we just say, oh, my cup is empty. But what the mind is cognizing, and the mind always cognizes, the way I put it, the mind always cognizes nouns, things, abstract ones and impermanent ones. The mind always cognizes a noun. It's a way of putting it. It's my way of putting it. Buddha doesn't say it like that. So actually, when I look in my cup and I say, oh, my cup is empty, the name of the phenomenon, the object, the existent, the established base, the object of knowledge, the name of the thing that I am cognizing is the absence of tea. Now, that is an abstract phenomenon. You can't touch it, taste it, smell it. In fact, you know, it's a deduction, isn't it? The only person who would cognize the absence of tea in their cup is a person who is expecting tea in their cup. And you get a shock and go, oh, my cup is empty. You look in the bank and you're thinking you're $5,000. There you go, oh, my bank account is empty. So that the name of that phenomenon, the absence of $5,000, the absence of tea, they're very specific phenomena. The only person who would observe the absence of $5,000 would be, you know, the person who expects the $5,000. The only person who would observe the absence of tea is the person who expects. So it's not something you can taste or touch or smell. That's an example of an abstract phenomenon, or in Buddhist terms, a phenomenon that's not impermanent, which they refer to as permanent, meaning not changing from moment to moment. So the only real reason they even discuss things like this is because it enables us to get our head around the absence of something. Like in your mind at this moment, you might not have any anger. So you could say, putting it in an affirmative way, there is present at this moment an absence of anger in my mind. That phenomenon, you see, whatever can be cognized by the mind, by definition, is a phenomenon. By definition, if it's a valid one, in other words, the definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. So it's axiomatic that that which can be cognized by mind is by definition that which exists. This is what causes it. This is what affirms it as existing. So the mind is totally central in the discovery of what exists and what doesn't exist. It's not some secondary thing in Buddhism that you can't trust. It's the one that exists. It's the one that creates everything. So there are phenomena that are impermanent. Mind is impermanent. All the normal objects of the five senses are impermanent. All of those are impermanent phenomena. Then there are some that are abstract, and it's necessary to understand this to get our head around the absence of inherent existence. They are phenomena that don't change from moment to moment, that are called permanent. And in our daily life, we don't bump into this. So that's why I very rarely mention it unless we're discussing emptiness, you see. So why was I bringing that up now? Anyway, I did. I forget the reason, but I did. So now I'm getting back to this idea of mind being mind is the actual cognitive process itself. It depends upon a decent working brain, at least for the gross level. It depends upon a working, the body working, you know, for example. It needs all that for it to function. But it's by definition is not physical. So again, this is where, and again, Jada Rinpoche last night was discussing this, and I talk about it quite a bit, because it's a really helpful model of the universe. This Vajrayana model of how a person is made up of gross consciousness, and then inextricably linked to our gross consciousness, which is our sensory consciousness, is the physical body, this body of ears and nose and eyes and, you know, bones and flesh. It's pretty evident, for example, that you cannot, by definition, have a cognition of I consciousness, and I consciousness is by definition not physical, unless there's an eyeball. It's pretty clear, isn't it? You have to have a physical eyeball there. Otherwise, so you know, so the body and the mind at this gross level, they're dependent upon each other. It's pretty evident. Now, when we get to the subtle level, it's very interesting, and especially if it's got the next level. And once you've stopped breathing in the death process, we discussed this last time. No, what are we doing now? Death. Oh, we're doing death today. I'm sorry. I forgot. Oh, that's right. We're in this module, aren't we? I forgot. So when you die, we've gone through, and I need you to get more. We've got to go into that process much more. We've already mentioned it once. I need you to ask me some questions and things. Maybe we can do that today. So the death process, you know, gross consciousness, you go through this gradual deconstruction. There's 25 components that gradually stop ceasing step by step. It goes, it's ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. And as again, Jada Rinpoche said last night, it's exactly what happens when you go to sleep, you know. So really, it's why the yogis can use their sleep to become familiar with this process, this meditation. So you've got the earth element. So, okay, so now in the universe, from the Vajrayana point of view, there's really just two phenomena. Forget impermanent, forget the abstract phenomena. There's basically two phenomena in the impermanent world: minds and matter. That's it from the impermanent world point of view. Minds and matter. And all matter, from this point of view, are made of the four elements. Now, that used to be the view that Mr. Galileo and that mob way back a few hundred years ago used. Now we've got all these different elements, haven't we? But this is still the model they use. There's minds and then there is matter. And by the time we get to the very subtle level of consciousness, once you've gone through the 8 stages of death and all the senses have ceased, the elements of the gross elements have ceased, then the next level is the subtle mind and the subtle body. The subtle mind really is our mental states. They're subtle, they're more subtle. We can access those in a gross body, but at a fairly limited level. But love and compassion and anger and jealousy, they're all mental states, and therefore they are subtle consciousness. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. Well, try to sneeze. Won't come. So you've got subtle, and there's again this process. The 5th stage is when so there's various components of this subtle body. You've got the wind energy, this prana, and there's so many of those. Spend like 13, 15 years studying these in the Tibetan medical system, same as in acupuncture. The Ayurvedic system the same. All these different wind energies, you know, all the different expressions of the element called the wind, air. Whereas Jada Rinpoche said last night, maybe it doesn't make sense for us to say wind in the modern world because we don't talk about the 4 elements any longer. He said, why not use the word energy? So Jada Rinpoche was using that term energy, and His Holiness uses that word, so let's use it. But it's referring to this wind energies or prana. So there's all the wind energies. Then you've got this subtle nervous system that is subtle, but you can't see it, you know. You can't see it with a microscope. And there's like 72,000 subtle channels going through the entire body from head to toe. And all these winds are going through those channels. And this is the point I'm getting to. Oh, no, one more component of the body, of the subtle body, is what they call red and white Kundalini. This is subtle liquid energy. And then this is the interesting point, that when you conceived in your mother's womb, in your mother's fallopian tube, where it joins your very subtle consciousness coming from the past life, coming from the bardo. We'll go into this in more detail. How many more talks have we got, Lars?
Could you say that again?
How many more talks have we got?
The next Thursday as well on this topic.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. So then, okay, so when you get conceived in your mother's womb, in your mother's fallopian tube, or wherever you get conceived, what's happening is your very subtle mind, your bardo mind, which is a subtle mind, left the bardo, this intermediate state, when your mummy and daddy hopped into bed or whatever, and that ran like a magnet, and it joins what we understand to be the egg and the sperm. But this model says there's a subtle red and white drops, they call it. They call them drop in Tibetan, tigle or kundalini in Sanskrit. There's a subtle red drop that is the essence of the red of the egg of the mother, and there's a subtle white drop that's the essence of the sperm of the father. And so these are what your very subtle, your consciousness conjoins. And that's the first second of the new person. And that starts, you start at that second, and you start at your heart chakra. That's where you begin. And that's this indestructible drop that's there throughout your entire life. And the whole death process is gradual deconstruction of these 8 stages. Everything deconstructs. First the senses, then the elements, then you get to the subtler one, the red, then and in the body, along with the airs and the mind, the airs, and then there's the red kundalini and white kundalini at your heart chakra. But there's also an aspect of this red and white kundalini that are at your crown and your navel. So there's these, the 5th and 6th stages and 7th, 5th and 6th and 7th stages are these gradual, ever more subtle of your mind. And the red kundalini comes up from the navel. The white kundalini goes down from the brow. They both come to the heart chakra. And then by the 8th stage, all the gross aspects have stopped. All the gross aspects of mind have stopped. All the gross physical components have stopped. And finally, that little red and white drop at your heart, which you got from your mummy and daddy, is like they call it indestructible drop. And your very subtle consciousness, your clear light consciousness is existing in there. And that opens, and then your very subtle consciousness would leave the body. And that's when death occurs. So conjoined with those winds that is existing in our mind, in our body all the time, are all our states of mind. And this is what they say in the Vajrayana, and this is what Jada was talking about last night, that this physical and mental mind and these elements are one entity, especially when it comes to the clear light one, the subtle one, the very subtle one. There is wind energy, which is physical, and there is the mind, which is mental. And they are the basis of all the bodies that we develop, whether it's a lion's body, a human body, or whatever, when you start to develop in the womb or whatever you do. But when it comes down to this very subtle one, he says they're inextricably linked. They're inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. They are one entity, but as he said, they're different in terms of their function. So the mind has the function of cognizing, and the wind has the function of what they call movement. So these are the basis of whether you're going to get born, become a Buddha. They're the basis of whether you get born as a hell being. They're the basis of whether you get born as a human, whatever it might be. And this is the way the universe is, they say, this is the observation of all the holy beings, right? So this mind, then, got the beginningless business, mind itself, and matter for that matter. Whatever exists in the universe at this second, whatever exists in the universe at this second, if you started tracking it back, like this telephone in front of me, you start tracking that telephone back, you will keep going in an unbroken chain of physical matter until the first second of this universe, until you get right back to the first Big Bang. Because every second of that phone, there's no point in which for 5 minutes nothing existed. This part of it came from this, which came from that, which came from this, which came from that. So the Buddhist here, of course, it's matter. So it's a combination of the 4 elements. All the physical universe is a combination of the 4 elements. Whether it's an atomic bomb, whether it's a fish's body, whether it's an atom, whether it's your body, whether it's a pen, whether it's pollution, whether it's subtle air, pure air, whether it's a rainbow, it's all made of the 4 elements. And for all minds are pervading all universes and are being reborn and reborn and reborn according to the karma they create. And we'll discuss this more. So all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. So that if you track back that phone, you get back to the first moment of the Big Bang. If you track back your mind, you get back to the first, you get back to your mother, and then you go, oh, then previous, and then previous, and then previous. And we keep looking for the first moment. Our biggest question, which for the Buddha is a non-question, is a mistaken question. When did I begin? When did it begin? When did everything begin? When did the universe begin? When did the world begin? We have that desperate, and we all have an assumption. That question assumes a first moment, doesn't it? Buddha says it's an absurd question in the first place, because by definition, you cannot have a first moment, because everything is cause and effect. And if everything is cause and effect, then you cannot posit a thing that didn't have a previous cause. It's just not a possibility. I mean, the Christians have intense philosophy discussing this, even capital F, capital C, about how there can be a first cause called God. We're not for the Buddha. It's just not viable. This is stuff we have to study and look into and analyze and debate upon to have some intellectual first confidence in this concept of beginninglessness. Not just some vague belief system, So there's different things I was just saying there about we'll go into more detail about the death process. And then I was touching on the Vajrayana model, how elements and minds are inextricably linked, and that's got a lot to do with karma. And we've discussed that briefly, and I'll go into it in more detail. But the main point here is to this idea that there's no creator. In fact, we don't need creating, Buddha says. It's an unnecessary addition. It's a mistake. He's not being rude. You see, Buddha doesn't argue with the concept of superior mind, superior being. He says, Arya being. When you realize emptiness, honey, you become called a superior being. But it doesn't mean creator in Buddhism. That's all. We can all become superior beings. We don't need creating. So there can't be a first cause, not a possibility. So if you can't have a first cause and everything is cause and effect, then of course you has to be beginning. It has to be, there's no option. You have to say there's beginningless mind, as hilarious as it sounds. I mean, we can't even remember 99% of today, for God's sake. Even the thought of even a past life is ridiculous. What about, we can't remember most of today. We can eventually. So the logic is the law of cause and effect. And if you have the law of cause and effect, then physical matter is also beginningless. I always quote His Holiness, paraphrasing in all his discussions with the scientists. Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all, as he would say. So these are the ideas that are kind of got to get familiar with, In one sense, they're very different. This is fundamental to the whole Buddhist view of the universe, So any questions about all that first? What time is it? 20 to 8. Okay. Ask me some questions about this discussion today.
You may raise your hand to ask up front or write your question in the chat, and I will read it out loud.
And the fact is, Buddha might be wrong. So you've got to have the courage to look into all this and get to see for yourself. As Dalai Lama says, if you're taking Buddha's methodology, you've chosen to, as you check things as you go, and if you do get to a point where you prove yourself from your direct experience that what he says is true isn't, then of course you would reject him. Of course you would. That's behind this. It's so important to remember that. Otherwise, we're just intellectually lazy. We prefer to believe things as we're just rather lazy, Any questions of any kind, please? Any kind at all? Yes. Yes, Carol.
Yeah, Venerable, thank you.
Good
Does time exist?
Ask the question a bit more. What do you mean by that?
Is it something which mind can cognize? Is time?
Well, you tell me. I mean, you look on the clock. Can you see if it's 7 minutes past 1? Can you cognize that? Simple example. Simple example. Okay, you can cognize it's 7 past 1 if you look on the clock, can't you? So then what do you mean by time, darling? That's the point. What do you mean by time?
What do I mean by time?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a movement. It's a movement. It's something that is moment to moment to moment.
Okay,
to moment.
it's impermanence.
It's
Things
impermanent.
change moment by moment. So
Gotcha.
okay, it's
Gotcha.
easy enough. There we have we have got concepts, haven't we? We live at a very conceptual level. We've got much subtle levels of mind, but the level we function at is conceptual. So we make up labels for things. Would you agree?
Yes.
Well, clearly we've made up a label called botany. So botany is the name given to this natural law of how things grow in gardens. I mean, would you agree with that? We name it, we label it botany. We label something mathematics. Well, we know what that refers to. So then if you have a thing called time, I mean, what would we say? We simply have, we've come up with some concepts of the passing of time based upon the moon and the sun, the movement of the sun every day. We've observed over time, we've observed the sun gets up and goes to bed, the moon gets up and goes to bed. So we've labeled that the passing of time, if you like, and we've put names upon it, and we called it 24 hours, we've called it all these things. So from that point of view, of course, it's a conventional phenomenon, isn't it? It's very simple. It's a conventional phenomenon, Carol.
Thank you. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Yes, darling.
Venerable, I'd like to share an experience. So when my mom died, I was in the US and she was in India. I was working out at the gym, and then all of a sudden, I just felt like this cord being plugged out of me. And in that moment, I just knew that she was gone.
Okay, that's not uncommon experience, yes.
So how does
it's also the same as I always tell the example of when I got pregnant. When I was 23, I knew that second a consciousness had come into my body. I didn't know those words. So it's because of, I would say it's because of who was it? Your mother, was it?
Yes.
Okay, because of the strong karmic history that you've got with your mother. We've all got strong karmic history. We go to that person's womb, don't we? So there's strong history with each other, a strong, strong karmic connection from the past. So that's not uncommon experience, darling. You just know because there's a strong connection between you. I mean, people are dying every second and you don't have that awareness, do you? Because there's no strong connection. But with people we have a strong connection with, you can have a feeling like you know someone's suffering, for example. People, it's because of a strong karmic connection, darling. And you see, the point is, so speaking about the mind, the gross level of mind, which is the senses, we can see that they're fairly limited what they can cognize, right? If it's not in front of you, you can't see it. But we've got this subtle consciousness, and that level of mind, when we've developed it, that level of mind is able to have clairvoyance continuously. We just get flashes sometimes. So it's sort of like you're touching the outer edge of your subtle mind. But the Buddhist view is we can all learn to access that seriously and properly and see vividly and clearly the past of all beings, not just our mummy, or not just get a flash of something. Do you understand, darling?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. Who else? Questions?
There's a question in the chat from Salo. Do you wish to ask it yourself, Salo? All right, I'll read it up loud. Can mind cognize things that don't exist?
We spend our lives cognizing things that don't exist. That's why we're all crazy. So what do you mean? I mean, for example, this is literally what the Buddhists would say. I mean, when I've got attachment in my mind, and I see a very delicious chocolate cake on that plate, it's so quick, the story that attachment is telling me, I don't even notice it. But if you wrote down what attachment is thinking and what attachment thinks is on that plate, it will say something like a divine, delicious cake, totally heavenly, completely delicious from its own side, that definitely will cause me happiness when I eat it. Well, Buddha's very simply telling us that cake does not exist on the plate. That's the way we are living in La La Land. We're seeing all the world through the lenses of our neuroses, our anger, our attachment, our delusions. So we are literally misconstruing phenomena across the board every second. I hope that answers your question. Who else is there?
No one's raising their hands nor writing in the chat.
Okay, so we'll keep going. Okay. So, okay, so let's go into a bit more the death process again, and just how, roughly speaking, the mind gets to take another body, you know. But before we even do that, let's look at the way karma ripens, back to karma. And this is the one that's related very much. This is, yeah, that we've got 4 ways our karma ripens. One way is the type of body we get. So at the time of death, when you start to stop breathing, about the 3rd or the 2nd or the 3rd stage of the 8 stages, very intense grasping kicks in, and that's a trigger for one of the karmic seeds, and we have billions of them in our karmic bank vault, if you like, or the main karmic seeds, which are the seeds that we've planted from doing complete actions, such as a complete action of killing, a complete action of non-killing, or whatever, when there's various conditions in place when you do a certain action. So one of those karmic seeds, and in our case, before, at our previous death, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our mother's egg and sperm in the fallopian tube, we were in another body, right? Could have been an animal's body, could have been a preta, could have been a hell being, could have been a god. We'll go into these. And this karmic seed was triggered when that life ceased. And that means so in our case, let's say we were a human before we could have been a human, that seed was triggered at the time we started to go through the death process, or soon after it started. So already, before you even stop breathing in the past life, we were programmed to go to our present mother's human womb. We're already programmed. Your mummy and daddy mightn't even have met each other yet, you know, but already you were programmed. And that's the karma. That's intense history with each other. We've got a very strong karmic connection with this particular mother, and maybe with a particular father, maybe, you know, it depends. So we've got a strong history with those 2 people. We ran like a magnet to their egg and sperm. And that was programmed already before we even stopped breathing in the past life. So then you go through this process, and by the time you stop breathing, you know, you look like you're ready for the body bag, but as we've been discussing, you're not ready, you're not dead yet. Then the subtler mind goes, and the subtle physical energies, the white Kundalini, the red Kundalini, the black appearance, these 3 different stages. And then you get to the clear light, where the mind, everything absorbs into the heart chakra, into the indestructible drop. So, you know, you might not leave the body yet, but at that point, all the great yogis, the ones who are totally in charge of this process, who've practiced all their lives and are completely able to go through this process of deconstruction without losing the plot. Their mind gets ever more subtle, and they are able to stay conscious at the ever more subtle levels. You know, they're able to do their sleep the same way. They go from the gross level to the subtle level, and they are aware at this subtle level. They've practiced all their lives. So the greatest yogis can go through this process, and they're in complete control. Then they get to the clear light consciousness, which is the subtlest level of our mind. I always think of it as the microscope of our mind. All the grosser levels of mind have ceased. All the grosser levels of physicality have ceased. This very subtle clear light mind. And the greatest yogis are able to stay there for hours, days, weeks, months, even years, if they choose to meditate. And what they're doing isn't just spacing out. They're becoming enlightened. And what that means is they're removing from their mind all the misconceptions. They're purifying their minds at that subtlest level. This is why, as Lama Zopa calls the chapter in his book, death is what the yogis have been waiting for, you know. So I really encourage you to read Rinpoche's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. So that's what we're aiming for. That would be the ideal way to die. You can cut through millions of lifetimes of rubbish, get to that subtle level, and because that's the most potent level, most capable level of your consciousness, that's unencumbered by all delusions and all rubbish, you can quickly become enlightened, quickly purify all the obstacles to liberation and to omniscience. But if it's an ordinary person, you stay there. You can stay there for up to 3 days, and most of the time, you know, you're just unconscious. That's it. So that's why it's the best scenario is to allow your grandma, your pussycat, your dog, your sister to stay there for 3 days undisturbed. That would be the ideal scenario for helping a person at the time of death. And that's why, isn't it, dying in a hospital, I mean, kind nurses and doctors, but it's about the worst place to die, you could say. If you've got a private room, fine. Like a friend of mine was in a private nursing home, and when her husband died, she shooed out all the doctors and nurses, and she locked the door, and she stayed there for 3 days and just stayed with him and did practices. You know, that's the ideal. That's the ideal. Totally in charge of the process, completely silent, only have the sound of prayers. And then the mind could stay for up to those 3 days. The yogis can stay much longer, you know, as I said. Lama Yeshe stayed in his body. He was in a hospital in Los Angeles when he passed away. And they tried to bring him back to life. It didn't work. So then he was kept all day in a room while Lama Zopa was there, and people meditated all day. Then they took him and put him in a pickup truck and drove really slowly along Highway 1, about 12, 15 hours, very slowly, driving his holy body all the way to Vajrapani Institute up north near, you know, an hour out of San Francisco. And then for a week, we all went there. Many of us from all over the world went there. And Lama's holy body was just in a coffin in one of the rooms, which was my office when I went there. And his body stayed completely supple and sweet smelling. This is what they say as a sign that the mind is still there. It was more than a week meditating, you know, in his body. And when they finally took his body, and there's a cremation. So we had right up, there's a hill. And we did, first of all, we did all these practices. Lama Zopa was there, Geshe Sopa was there, many lamas, people from all over the world. We did lots of practices all day, every day. And then eventually when there was the fire puja, they called it a fire puja, a very long ceremony, took several hours, and one special holy lama came, Song Rinpoche. And then they build this cremation, like a square structure of bricks. It's all exactly according to certain architecture in the Tibetan tradition, the Vajrayana tradition. And so like a low, about 1 meter maybe wall, square with 4 walls and holes like a fireplace. And then his holy body was dressed in these special robes and carried in a chair, and his body was still flexible. He was there, he'd been there for 5 days, and his body was still flexible. And it was at that point that the monk who was getting his body ready for the fire puja said that the red drop came out. So one of the signs that your mind has left the body, because this red and white drop is at your heart, right? What you got from your mummy and daddy at conception. And when that opens up, that indestructible drop, and the consciousness leaves, the white one will continue and go out through the sex organ, and the red one will keep moving up and come out through the nose. So you can see that, and that's a sign the mind has left. And this monk said he saw, I think it was the red drop came out of Lama. So he'd been meditating all those days. And his body smelt sweet and it was flexible. It wasn't, So then anyway, he was in this chair. Then they put him in this fireplace, and then they build up this cone shape, white, covered with plaster, like a chimney, really. And then they get someone who hasn't ever met Lama to put the first fire in, and then they burn. And you throw in all these special offerings for several hours as well, and burn the holy body. That's what they did for Lama. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so Lama was in control. He was meditating. He accessed his clear light mind. He was conscious and he meditated. And he was, who knows what realizations he achieved. I've got no idea. But those of us who aren't realized will just die without any control. But as I said to you in one talk, I forget, just to remind us now, if a negative state of mind, if a negative karmic seed is triggered at that time, because the mind is very agitated and upset, and that's how it is for most people, because most people aren't ready for death. Most people don't know how to help a person get ready for death. It's so tragic. So if a person is very anxious at the time of death, freaking out, angry, upset, you name it, a negative seed is triggered. And already, because the mind is getting more subtle, the gross mind is getting more subtle, it means the subtle mind is becoming more capable. And so then it would be a hideous experience. You'll be freaking out because you're seeing your future suffering life coming. And if a virtuous karmic seed is triggered, death will be a blissful experience. Because a virtuous karmic seed is triggered and you've got a human rebirth or something coming, So it'll be a very pleasing experience. They even say in the text that this dying process, once the karmic seed has been triggered before you stop breathing, which indicates your next life, if it's a negative one, it's like going towards the dark. It's a very fearful experience. And if a virtuous karmic seed has been triggered, it's like going towards the light. They say it like that. And then when you stop breathing, then your subtle mind continues its deconstruction process and the subtle physical energies. And then you get to the clear light mind, you just stay there unconscious and up to 3 days. And then when the mind does leave the body, and it's very rare, it would never be after this 3 days, apparently, then it leaves through different places. If it's going to be born in a pure land, your consciousness will leave through the crown chakra. If you're going to be born as a human, it'll leave through your eyes. If you're going to be born as a hell being, it'll leave through your anus. If you're going to be born as an animal, it'll leave through your sex organ. I can't remember one of those last two, maybe it was the other way. That's how they say. So when your consciousness leaves, it goes into the intermediate state. It's like a dream state between lives, just like a dream state. And it can be very intense, it can be very joyful, depending, you know. And then when the new mummy and daddy, in our case, when the new mummy and daddy hopped into bed, then our mind left the intermediate state and ran like a magnet, intensely driven by intense attachment. Attachment is what creates this entire universe. So attachment drives everything. The whole universe is constructed on the basis of attachment. You know, all the objects of the senses, this very body we've got with the 5 senses, this is karmic evolution. We've created this from attachment. So they say in the texts, if you know, in my case, born as a girl, when I ran like a magnet from the intermediate state, because I suddenly saw my new mummy and daddy having sex, I was intensely attracted, sexually attracted to have sexual union with my father. That's the energy, that attachment energy is what drove me to go to that egg and sperm. And when I got there, in a millisecond later, you don't have to fly on an aeroplane, you can just be there, then you're pissed off because all you can see is the sex organs, and that causes you to die out of the intermediate state, and your mind then joins that egg and sperm. So as Lama Zopa says, it's clear that this universe is created by suffering, you know, created by attachment. If you're going to be born a girl, you're intensely attracted. A boy, you're attracted to have sex with your mother. I'm sure Freud would have loved this. So anyway, that's what they say in the text, because attachment drives everything, you know. Attachment is the energy that drives the entire universe. And that's why it's so important to understand what a Buddha means by attachment. It's not just some cute thing, you know. It's primordial. So, okay, several things I'm talking about here. Several things I'm talking about. So we've got to think, well, how is it? What are the energies involved in causing the mind that's in a human body to go to a lion's body? Well, that's where karma comes in. If we try to understand that we're not made by anybody, we're not some product created by some artist called God or mummy or daddy or something. Every tiny thing that we are, every fraction of our mind, every tiny way that our body is, all the millions of karmic seeds created by our mind, our programming of our own mind is what creates that. This is the thing to get our head around. Karma is self-creation, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls it. And this is where, if we have to understand this Vajrayana model of mind and physical matter, mind and winds, then we can begin to understand how universes, even the coming together, the configuration of the 4 elements, whether you call it London, you know, some smelly little ugly place full of pollution, whether you call it a hell realm, whether you call anything, whatever you call it, it's the configuration of various elements. So we've got to think, well, who put those elements together? Well, because all minds are inextricably linked to their own elements. These are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. And then there are the elements of the universe. The 4 elements are just existing. No one made them. They're just existing. But they're kind of inert. They're just existing. So as Lama Zopa says, I mentioned this several times, when even just your mind, let's say, is angry, you're having angry thoughts, automatically what's happening karmically is you're creating the habit to be angry. That's one way karma ripens, you get angry. then it's polluting your mind in anger. But because your mind is linked to wind energies, those wind energies are polluted by that anger, and that eventually becomes sickness. All illnesses are caused by the imbalance of the elements, and the imbalance of the elements are caused by the different negative states of mind from before. So then we can see we've got a mind and we have a body. So the body we get is in our case is the fruit of non-killing. We get a human body, but then within this human body we have a mind, and we can see that humans have all got different kinds of tendencies, haven't they? So we have a bunch of tendencies. That's the second way our karma ripens, our various tendencies. Now the third way our karma ripens is called experiences similar to the cause. Well, we're very social beings, aren't we? Monkeys and all the animals, all the humans, we're intensely social, aren't we? We all live together and hate each other and love each other and have wars together. Everywhere you turn, there are sentient beings, rats and cockroaches and humans, and we divide them all into enemies, friends, and strangers, don't we? We can see that. Why? Because we've created causes to be together again and again and again. You have people you hate who hate you. Guess what? You each created this. You're in this tennis match again, bashing each other up because you've got past history together. You bump into the people you've met before at a particular time, and you experience that particular experience which you've done together in the past. It's not cosmic, it's logic. You couldn't not possible to meet a single being, ant, cockroach, bug, bed bug, human, rapist, murderer, lovely person, if you hadn't met them before and if you hadn't done similar things to them before. This is called experiences similar to the cause. And it's logic, and it's a coherent law, and no one runs it. There is no boss. There's no one pulling the strings. It's a natural law. Now, we can see we also don't float around in the sky, do we? We've got environments. Every being in the universe lives in an environment. So if you're a human, you have depending on the karma you created, you'll have a certain environment. Some humans have a very delicious environment where the food is delicious, the water is good, everything's lovely, your body's healthy. Other people live in disgusting places. You can't breathe the air. You're always sick. This is called environmental karma. So the very way the physical elements are configured is the direct result of the karma all those sentient beings created, together or separately. So an entire family can all eat peanuts till the cows come home, but one child dies at the thought of a peanut. That's obviously individual environmental karma. Everybody living in the place where there's an earthquake, where the elements literally erupt, that's the collective result of actions done collectively. And I mean, environmental karma is oldest of all, could be millions of lifetimes. Now look at us now with the pandemic. Millions of people all experiencing the one called the environmental karma of past killing, that the physical world itself, which means other human beings, cause us to get sick. And some people are also experiencing the karma called experiences similar to the cause of past killing by dying young or getting killed. Look at the world. And no matter how many, it seems to me, how many vaccinations we keep creating, there's the karma is so strong. We had the Delta variation, now we've got the Omicron variation because the karma is so strong. That's how heavy it is, So the physical world is the karmic appearance of the millions of people who experience that physical world in that particular shape and form. There's no creator. It's not, there are laws. Everything has laws. There is the botany, there is physics, there is astronomy, whatever you want to call it. There are those laws. But the fundamental cause of why there are those elements in the first place configured in that particular way, that's the direct result of the actions of the sentient beings who experience those. So we are the creators of the universe, folks. So what's a hell being? What's a spirit? You know, all this is related to the Buddhist model of the mind. The Buddhist model of the mind refers to all beings in the universe, not just humans. So we've got negative states of mind, neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, distorted, destructive, painful states of mind. When we follow those, they pollute our mind, and they pollute the wind energies, and they produce future sickness, and then they also produce future environments, and they attract us when we die to beings with that kind of karma, you know. So the other thing that's really important to remember is karma multiplies enormously life after life. So give an example of attachment. I know I always use the example of, I'm sure people have heard of the furries. I remember back in the 90s, I read articles about these people called furries, F-U-R-R-I-E-S, people who are now like a whole subculture, people who are super, super attached to animal shapes and forms. Not even real animals, some of them are, but like cartoon-like. I remember this interview in Vanity Fair with this fellow. He talked about how when he was a little boy, he would got sexually turned on, not by the girls at school and the sports, but by the Mickey Mouse mascot. Of course, he thought he was weird. He was quite depressed. But as he got older, he started to meet his people, and they're called furries. So what's the logic of this? It sounds so weird, doesn't it? Somebody gets turned on what we call sexually when they see Mickey Mouse mascot or see animals. So these people, they meet in her, they have their meetings, their conferences, they all dress up in Mickey Mouse, or they dress up like raccoons, and they say it's like cartoon-like, you know. Somehow the hard edge ones like to have sex. And this fellow, he talked about having sex with his stuffed toys. He spent all his money on eBay on his stuffed toys, and he has sexual contact with his stuffed toys. It's very common. You look it up, furries. So let's analyze the logic of that when it comes to karma, because it really shows how we create everything. I mean, you know, if you're like, I always joke about my friend Panos, my friend in Athens, who told me I'm allowed to tell this story. Since he's a little boy, he was walking down the street in Athens with his Greek mother, obviously a Greek mother, and he sees a naked lady poster, or half naked lady, at the cinema. And he said, his little 6-year-old voice piped up, "Mummy, why is my penis standing up?" So of course, Mummy was mortified and embarrassed. And the cinema lady cracked a joke and said, "Oh, he'll be a lady killer." And so in other words, what is it why did Panos's energy go berserk at the age of 6? Why did this little boy at the school sports, him little penis standing up when he sees a bloody Mickey Mouse mascot, for God's sake? What's all that about? Well, I'll tell you. Attachment is simply the over-exaggeration of the deliciousness of something that causes us to think about it all the time and want to be close to it, or have it, or eat it, or stick our thing in it, or you name it. Okay? That's attachment. And it's completely neurotic. So the point is, you can have regular attachment. So we can imagine a furry. My deduction is he was a nice American boy in a past life who liked, like millions of Americans especially, love cartoons. Think about this. And loved his pets and loved his stuffed toys. Now, I'm not trying to be fundamentalist here. Hear how attachment works. Attachment, when you're a little kid, your mind of attachment goes berserk. You're full of creativity, and attachment is a lot of its creativity. You think about your little animals, and you love your animals, you read all your cartoons. Now, if you realize every millisecond of what we ever think and do and say and hear and touch and smell, none of it goes astray everything is stored as memories in our mind, number one. But number two, the qualitative thing that happens is the karmic one. So attachment, there you were, a nice little, you know, Christian boy or girl, nice, good little American person, loving your toys, reading all your comics. And our minds are so creative, we get completely involved in this world. So your attachment's growing and growing and growing. Now, when you die, that attachment multiplies 1,000,000 times. And that's what we call sexual attachment. We think it's some special thing from God. No, it's just very powerful, extreme, exaggerated attachment that happens to trigger very extreme and very delicious feelings. So attachment, so do virtues multiply. And that's wonderful to know. If we can practice love and compassion every day in this life, it can multiply and we'll get bodhicitta very easily in the next life. Karma multiplies hugely from life to life. So there's this nice Christian person, American, let's say, loving his pets and loving his cartoons, exaggerating attachment, exaggerating it, leaving powerful imprints in the mind, imprints of memory and karmic imprints. So what do you think? He gets born a human because he's got good ethics, but attachment, suddenly he sees Mickey Mouse mascot at the age of 7 and his little penis stands up. That's called sexual attachment. And because it's so much more fundamental, because it's the human body itself, isn't it? That the energy coursing through our different channels, and it triggers intensely good feelings. But attachment energy, whether it's in Panos's body, when he sees some lady girl human shape, or the furry boy, when he sees a Mickey Mouse shape. In each case, that strong karmic imprint, in one case with toys and animals, and the other case with a human being. So Panos got turned on by a girl shape, and this other boy got turned on by an animal shape. So this is how we create our own reality. We create everything. And then, of course, when you have delicious, like the fisherman, I mentioned the fisherman, when he was 6 years old, maybe his penis didn't stand up. But one guy who was this art writer, I always quote him, who when he talked about when he went trout fishing for the first time, he said it was like a cosmic experience. I mean, you know, it was like almost like a spiritual, what he called ecstasy. I don't think his penis stood up, but an ecstatic feeling. So where the hell do you think that comes from? From the habit of killing fish. And then it triggers intense pleasure. So the level of pleasure Panos, the furry or the fisherman experience is the strength of the karmic connection. This is the logic of how karma works, you know. And so, of course, because we all want good feelings, and when your penis stands up, it must be a very nice feeling. I mean, I haven't got one, but I'm sure in past lives I had one. Excuse me being so blunt, I'm embarrassing some of you, but get my point. Of course, the feeling is very delicious. And of course, the girl poster that Panos saw, she must have looked just divine. And the Mickey Mouse mascot must have appeared so delicious because the attachment took over and wrote this dramatically marvelous story about the Mickey Mouse mascot, the trout fishing, or the girl shape. I mean, Panos, when he got older, he told me when he got to about 12 and he saved up his pocket money, he didn't go and buy a toy train. He went to prostitutes. He loved going to prostitutes. This is attachment, folks. So attachment is an exaggeration of the deliciousness of something and its habit. So this is the trouble. So when you understand habit, like why do you think some people, get turned on by looking at a 5-year-old girl or a boy or a dog? People have sex with animals. This furry guy, he said, I tried to have sex with human appropriate size animals like a German shepherd, but he prefers his stuffed toys. We make it all up, people. This is the joke. So don't be surprised if you're attracted to animals. You've got incredible attachment. And look at the West. We are so disgustingly attached to our pets. I'm not complaining about loving your animal. That's virtue. I'm talking about attachment. Don't be surprised if you're attached to your pussycat at the time of your death. You'll be running like a magnet to a pussycat womb. So if you're born with, if you've got also tendencies to be angry, and like you kill all your life, like the ants and the dogs, maybe not humans, then don't be surprised that karma multiplies. A negative karmic seed is triggered when you die, and then as you die, you're running towards, you know, you can't wait to get to that mummy's lion's egg and sperm. It looks super attractive to you. Then you get born, and the tendencies you've got will suit the lion's body. They're all created by themselves. They're all created by themselves. I mean, the mummy's there, ready-made for you to play out your karma, you know. They're all sentient beings. They're all mind possessors. They're all experiencing the fruits of their own past actions. So because the whole universe is made of the 4 elements, and then because there are countless living beings, you could argue that wherever there are the 4 elements, that's a conducive environment for the birth of beings to be there to conjoin with those 4 elements. So the whole, I mean, our body, look at it, it's a walking zoo. We know that there are millions of beings living in our body, just under our arm, in our mouth. They're living beings conjoined with the 4 elements. So wherever there are the 4 elements, you're going to find sentient beings there. You know? So what's a hell being? Predominance of anger energy. So when they die, a strong anger karma ripens, killing karma ripens, heavy duty harming karma ripens, and it multiplies 1 billion times. And your mind, literally, you're reborn spontaneously. You don't need a mother's womb for this. You're spontaneously reborn due to your own past negativity. And your mind is conjoined predominantly now. The 4 elements are now the predominance of the 4 elements that your mind is conjoined with are the fire element. What do you think a spirit is? Attachment energy, driven from pillar to post, frantically, conjoined predominantly with air energy. Ours, look at ours, like a lump of stone, isn't it? The God realm, the predominance of virtue, their minds conjoin with subtle light. Our minds pollute or purify our 4 elements, and the forms we take are suited to our mind. So it's just talking, okay? Just chatting away, trying to explain this, how it would be based on this model, based on this hypothesis, okay? Any questions, people?
We've got a question in the chat from Terry.
Good, go.
Do you wish to ask it yourself, Terry?
Yep. Who's asking?
Hello.
Hi, sweetheart. Talk to me.
Okay, I'll try. I was thinking about, like, if anybody at all, if one lives out of kind of actions that are really resulting karma, like negative karma on and on, if you drop out of those actions and then yet
Sorry, drop out. What do you mean drop out?
Like you don't continue the actions that are producing.
Purify, you change your mind, yes, and you practice and virtue and goodness and purify your negative karma. Yeah, that's called practice. Yes.
Definitely. And if in that same situation, in connection to your decision to start, you know, going to the clearer path, there is like a part in the chain where the results are turning even more karmical for other people.
I'm a bit confused, darling. I'm losing what you're saying. I don't understand your point. I'm a bit confused. I'm so sorry. Can you say it in another way, please? Or ask me a question.
Okay. I don't do anything that is causing karmic results, but as a cause of my decision not to cause karmic results, other people are getting more negative results in their life.
I don't understand, darling. Every millisecond you are creating karma. What do you mean you don't create karma? If you're an ordinary sentient being, every millisecond of what you think and do and say is the process of creating karma.
Okay.
That's what karma means. Every millisecond of whatever you think and do and say, each millisecond you are dropping seeds into your mind, depending on whether you're coming from attachment or anger or love or kindness. So we're all the time, until you're highly advanced, we are all creating karma every millisecond with our body, speech, and mind. It's just the way it is. It's a natural process.
Mm-hmm. And can, like, non-negative actions, can they result back as negative causes?
Negative actions don't bring causes. Negative actions will bring results. Say some more. I don't quite understand your point. Ask your question in another way, darling.
Like I don't intentionally cause harm, or I don't make a
Okay,
reaction.
so what you're saying is you don't intentionally cause harm, but what happens? What are you saying will happen?
Harm will be caused despite it of.
What, darling?
That some negativity will occur despite.
Like, give an example. Give an
of.
example, darling. Give an example. A simple example.
Okay. Well, as an example, like let's say I have a group of friends that are all like using drugs.
Yes.
And these people are advising, like, you know, we just go together and we all take the same thing and we all kind of like choose to follow each other's actions. And then one day I decide that I don't want to do that anymore.
Okay,
and
fine. So you stop taking drugs and you try to be a better person. So then what's the question?
Let's say on the next day, one person from the group dies and it's blamed on me for me not being there to support the person by taking drugs.
Okay, stop. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had no intention to harm anybody, right?
No.
You didn't do any harm, did you?
No.
Okay, then you didn't harm it. So if we know that people think crazy things, so that's their problem, isn't it? Nothing to do with you, darling. But we know people criticize us, people point fingers to us, don't they? We have to be very brave, isn't it?
I guess so. I don't know. And I'm thinking also, like, if I continuously pursue to do good for myself and thinking from the point of view that what is the most best and kind of suitable solution for myself today.
You must do that. That's called practicing. You must do that. That's your first step. You must practice virtue, practice morality, not killing, not stealing, not harming. And that is what is beneficial for you. And then eventually we can start to be helpful to others as well. This is what practice is, sweetheart. This is good. You have no choice. Do you agree with that?
I kind of agree, but it's also a little bit hard because at least for now, it's quite exclusive. I mean, like, there's not a lot of people I'm around currently, very few.
No, but it can be private, darling. People don't need to know. This is your private business.
Yeah.
They don't need to know. You don't need to stand out. And then if you start to change in this different way, so certain friends will fall away, won't they? You understand?
Yeah.
So that's why you need, these days, you need to be on meetings at Zoom, because there's lots of good courses with Zoom and you can meet friends that way. It's important you have friends who support you, darling. I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's nice to get the head straight and things more clear than it used to be before, right?
That's right.
I cannot take a second round in life to have fun and keep on going.
Right. You keep moving and try and protect yourself and keep away from troublemakers. You don't need them. Okay.
Yeah.
Good, darling. Take care.
As well. Thank you.
Right. Yes, Wolfgang.
Venerable Robina, you said a beautiful sentence, very, very clear for me, that the physical world is the karmic appearance.
Yes, that's right.
According to this sentence, I have the question, how does this fit into the reality of purified, realized Lama in Tibet who are tortured and
yes,
killed?
Because if they've just chosen to be reborn in a situation to help others, so they just play acting. It's not their karmic. I mean, it depends on who you are. Let's say you're the Dalai Lama and they say he is a Buddha. If he is a Buddha, then not any of that was his karmic appearance. He had a strong karmic connection with these people and he chose to be born in that way purely to help them. But depending, another person might not be fully developed yet, and they might still be a bodhisattva, but they still haven't finished all their karma. So the thing that they do see of suffering might well be their own karmic appearance, but they purify it by having it, they see it properly and they can purify it very quickly. Do you understand?
So they choose.
Absolutely. The bodhisattvas, by the time you get to be a fairly reasonable high bodhisattva, you're choosing exactly what you're doing. And if you haven't finished the job yet, the things that you will experience will still be your karma, but you don't get negativity from it. You just use it all up. But if you're a Buddha, you've cleaned up everything. You choose totally. Dalai Lama must have chosen totally to be born with that situation, to have all the suffering, but he wouldn't have been suffering. It's just he's choosing that because of his karmic connection with all those people.
Thank you very much.
Okay, do you understand? Yeah, okay. That's why a very powerful practice, Wolfgang, when we start to have the view of karma and we realize, you know, whatever happens to us is our karmic appearance, both good and bad. Instead of just getting angry with the bad things and blaming people, you can be happy you finished it and you can see it as purification. And in that way, it becomes much more powerful purification anyway. And if it's the good things, you don't just greedily eat it all up. You know it's the fruit of your past virtue and you use it to help others and you use it to do more of the same. So you're much more in charge of the process. That's how we apply karma in daily life and make it really part of our practice. And it helps us, and it helps us realize emptiness. There's no inherent, and nothing, there's no intrinsic anything, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Samuel.
Hello.
Yes, darling.
So when a person kills fish and enjoys that,
That's
his
right.
present feelings are due to actually past virtuous karma.
That's right. Exactly.
So what positive karma could be the cause of deriving pleasant feelings from killing?
Well, not just that, we all derive, we are in a realm of existence called desire realm, where we get pleasure from eating cake. It's exactly the same, except at least you don't harm the cake. It's all negative because we've got the karma from the past virtue in our bank vault of karmic seeds. But the tragedy is, because we're samsaric and we're full of attachment, we don't have any other method for triggering happy feelings except to eat cake, jump on girls and boys and kill people. I mean, it seems difficult to understand, but there's no direct relationship between delusions and happiness. It's just the way we're all born. In other words, the happiness we experience in this life, they say it's very polluted happiness. But it's not, but it is, if you didn't have any virtuous karmic seeds in your bank vault, no matter how many cakes you ate, you'd never feel happy. So the tragedy is, that's why we waste all those virtuous seeds, because we tip them down the toilet, because we end up doing negative actions to trigger the happy feeling. And then we create more negative karma as a result, and to get unhappy feelings in the future. It just seems rather tragic, doesn't it? That killing or eating cake, which is a negative action, a certain degree, can trigger a pleasant feeling, which in turn is the fruit of virtue. It's a hard one to get, isn't it? Exactly. I understand your point.
Okay.
What else? People, time to go. Look, darlings, it's 8:30 already. My time, 8:30. Any other questions? So today I was just sort of raving on a bit, saying a few things, trying to talk a bit more about this model. Using this Vajrayana model is very helpful. The 4 elements and minds inextricably linked, and everything we think and do and say programs the mind, which in turn affects the winds, which in turn eventually produces ill health or good health, which in turn eventually impacts upon the external elements. The whole universe is an expression, you know, or as I said before, karmic appearance of every sentient being. Like I always quote, as Lama Yeshe said, hell is in some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. It's the manifestation of the negative energy of the past of that suffering sentient being. And the other one, the big one to remember, is how karma multiplies from life to life. Regular attachment in one life can literally manifest 1,000,000 times more intense the next life. And you'll now see Mickey Mouse and it'll turn you on. And see the thing about so-called sexual attachment, we call it that. All it means is the pleasure that's derived from contact with another body is intensely strong, because that is a very strong habit, isn't it? I mean, from all the animals, all the humans, is what produces us. So the intensity of that habit is equal to the intensity of the pleasure. And that's why the fisherman, the intensity of the habit of killing equal the intensity of the pleasure that was triggered. And this is the tragedy, because we think jumping on girls or boys and killing fish, because it seems to trigger happy feelings, we assume it's a good action. So that's why we keep doing more of it. That's why samsara is so much suffering. That's why attachment is a honey-covered razor blade. It's 1,000,000 times more heavy suffering than the supposed gross suffering, you know. It's like technology. We really need to understand how this works, you know. All right, darlings, I'm going to leave you to it. Food for thought. I really request that you read the course notes. They're very excellent. And just listen to all these things and have good discussions. There's not much of what I've said today will be in the teachings. Some of it will be in the teachings, you've said. Yeah, but just think about all this. get some confidence in it. And and we'll talk more next week. Thank you, precious ones. Jang Chub Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchid, Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang, Gong Ne Gong Du Baba Shog. And I please encourage you to look up Maitripa College in Portland, to look at Jado Rinpoche and do your due diligence, check up on him to see if he's a valid Lama. I mean, I'm telling you, he's one of Lama Zopa's Lamas. That should give us some confidence, but we still have to choose. He's giving teachings each evening, and it's morning time in California, of course, in Portland, but it's suitable for us in Europe. And then 23rd, he's giving a Tara initiation. All right, sweethearts. Thank you so much, everybody.
We look forward to
Thank you, Venerable Rena.